Right on. Thank you very much, Summer. Thanks, Steve. Thank you for anyone else who has a part in this amazing platform to carry the message of the big book, of which I love so dearly. It's changed my life. It's given me life, and it gives me purpose in life every day. I don't know where I'd be without the big book. You know, when God was handing out directions to people to live their lives, he missed me. I didn't get those directions. And at 42 years old, he gave me my first set of directions, and I've never looked back. And this book is truly a design for living that works in all conditions. Like the book says, I found that spiritual principles would solve all of my problems. There's not a problem in my life that doesn't get solved in the big book. And, you know, I hear people say, you know, not everything gets solved in the big book. Yeah, well, I call bullshit. I think it all gets solved in the big book. I think it gets solved with my relationship with God. And through the relationship that I seek with God, I actually find a relationship with myself. And, you know, I've studied a lot of, this is by no means to insult or discredit any other type of method of self-searching or spirituality. But I've tested and searched a number of different spiritual disciplines, self-help programs, ways to better your life, philosophies, and there is nothing better than the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous for any aspect of my life or to the people that I've worked with. You know, I'll just say this as a qualification as well. And I think it's helpful because as I work with people, when I tell them this part, and most people around my parts, they already know this, so it's not an issue, but you know, I've sponsored well over 300 people in the program. I've helped thousands of people, and the ones that follow this directive in this book precisely, they have a higher, far level superior quality of life than the ones who just take it as a philosophy or a moral guidance or a fluffy book that makes them feel good. So to me, this book is the word, and I follow it, and my life is pretty damn good today. And it's much different than it was. I'll say that. You know, I think when I originally booked in this speaker segment, it was about 3 months ago, and I had topics to choose from, and I picked a different topic. And I know they've made some changes on the Big Book Compendium. And so today I am speaking on the fourth step, not by choice, but by directive, and I'm totally fine with that. So what I'll be doing today, to me, there's two aspects of this program. There's the person who's brand new, and then there's the person who's not brand new anymore. Usually, typically at around 1.5 to 2 years, recovery has to change. So I'm going to be kind of talking about two aspects of this step as we kind of go through some of the material and some of my opinion and experience through my own life and through the lives of the people that I've worked with. So what I'm going to start with is, you know, it talks about right after the step 3, we take the step 3 decision. And most of us don't know what the step 3 decision is, but we really have a strong ego, right? So I really want to emphasize how strong the ego is, okay? I've met a lot of people in the program that have a theoretical God. And in the step 3, if you can remember, it talks about we had to quit playing God. Here's the how and the why of it. And then it goes into the how and why of how we quit playing God. Then it talks about God is the Father, we are his children. He is the director, we are his agent. And then later on, it talks about we have a new employer. So it's really stating the relationship that we actually need, right? And then it goes on to say this concept was the new and triumphant arch which we passed through to freedom. So right in the literature itself, it's talking about God as a concept. So I'm going to say the theory of God. Okay, if the theory of God or the concept of God only stays a theory or concept, the results are we're picking up a drink. And the thing about the ego, and why I say this, is because the ego is super powerful. The ego can attach to anything that it wants to because it has its own feelings and it has its need for validation. And when we have done our step 4s, most of us can see what a need for validation we actually have. And it's no different even in the steps and in the program. So when we make that step 3 decision and we say, okay, I've turned my will and my life over, but we don't really even know what our will and our life is, the ego attaches to that idea of God. We end up going through the steps. We don't actually turn over our lives to the care of God. It's a theoretical idea that we are, but we don't really. And then we pick up a drink. And why do we? Why is it that we see so many people share at the podium and say, I'm good with God, me and God got this, I've turned my will and my life over, and then 2 days later they're drunk? Well, in the book, it talks about the alcoholic at a certain point has no effective mental defense against the first drink. His defense must come from God. What God becomes an effective mental defense for a lot of people, because it's only a theoretical God. Like it says in the step 3, it's a concept. It's a conceptual God only. Faith alone is insufficient. To be vital, must be accompanied by self-sacrifice and unselfish constructive action. How do I do the self-sacrifice? What does that even mean? Most people always think that self-sacrifice means just going and helping people. No, it doesn't mean that at all. Or else it wouldn't say the unselfish constructive action part. That is going to help people. The self-sacrifice is understanding the root of the trouble. Selfish self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our trouble. I need to understand self. I need to understand the root of the trouble. I need to understand, how do I self-sacrifice in any given moment? If my life is run with me playing God, using mind and emotional manipulation and all of these like subconscious behaviors, how do I expose that? And when I do expose it and I start getting conscious of it, how do I actually turn it over? That is actually what self-sacrifice is. That is actually, what step 3 is talking about, turning my will and my life over. I might not be able to guess what my will is for God, but most of us go through the program with the best of intentions and we try to guess what it is. Oh, I think because this looks good, that's God's will for me. Oh, I think because this seems bad, that's not God's will for me. That is total horseshit. Okay? Where we find out what God's will for us is it's actually worked in your step 10. You can see your will, and as long as you see your will and you sacrifice your will for God and you leave the results up to Him, whether it seems good or bad is really indifferent. At least when you're done the process of the real step 10, not what it says on the wall, you are left with the results of principles, and you leave up the results are up to God, no matter what it is. But before we get there, we have to start understanding some things at a deeper level, right? We have to understand that step 3 decision is only a decision. We do not know what it means to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God when we first come in here. And many people with many, many years don't even understand what that means at years of sobriety. And they're still fighting everyone and everything. They're still resentful and they're still not liking themselves. And there's a whole bunch of symptoms of that spiritual malady still kicking around. So as we get into, a little bit more in that step 3, it said, when we sincerely took the position, when we honestly, sincerely took the position that actually is taken in the step 10. And when you look at the step 3 promises, you can find those exact same promises, but they're not promises anymore in the step 10. They're actually came to fruition because that's where we're turning our will and our life over. Okay. So step 10 is step 3, in my opinion. And I can prove that all day long in this literature. I would have no problem going against anybody proving that in this literature and the other book, the 12 and 12. I know this is mainly a big book compendium. I may touch base a little bit on the 12 and 12 because how can I not? There's so much in there that actually ties into, like, really into the third column of the resentments in the step 4. So when we get into the step 4, it talks about, we launched on a course of vigorous action. The next step was a personal house cleaning, of which many of us never have attempted. None of us really, before we got here, ever did a real serious self-examination of our life. We might have pondered like how our life sucked and maybe how it's good, but that's as far as it really got, right? And when you understand what the literature says, it says we didn't drink because we were just wanted to drink. We're drinking because of causes and conditions. And maybe we even drank for years and it was okay and it worked pretty well for us. But at a certain point in our drinking career, we crossed the line. Alcoholics drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. The sensation is so elusive that while they admit it is injurious, that sensation that I used to get when it used to work for me is now elusive. But I keep trying to grab it, but it slips out of my fingers every time because I've crossed the line, and that sensation and the feeling that I used to get when it worked for me is now elusive. Although I admit it is injurious, I know that it's bad for me. I cannot, after time, differentiate the true from the false, and I pick up. And when I have those mental blank spots, when I have these inability to leave it alone, when I have no effective mental defense, and I get to this jumping off point, I don't know what to do. And I really love how in the vision for you, it talks about we can't imagine life with alcohol and we can't imagine life without it. Because you can't drink, but you can't not drink. So what do? You need something more powerful than alcohol. And I'm down here, here's drugs and alcohol. The only thing more powerful is God. But if God's only a conceptual idea, then he's actually less powerful than alcohol, because he's actually within me in my own belief system that's fucking false and not even real because it's attached to the ego. That's why I will drink again. So as we get down to these causes and conditions, though the decision was a vital and crucial step, that line means two things. It means vital, means it's really important to overcome drinking and do this step, because I need to see what my will in my life is, that I'm actually turning over. But the word vital comes from vitality, which means giving of life. And if you really want a good life, this program brings your life to a level of life that you can't even imagine. And that is the vitality that the other part of that word is talking about. That's my experience. That's the experience of the people that I've worked with. Therefore, we started upon a personal inventory. I need this inventory because I'm looking for the things that are in myself that are blocking me. And a lot of people, when they do this step, they don't really understand that the reason I'm doing this, as it described in the We Agnostics chapter, the fundamental idea is within every man, woman, and child of God, but it's often obscured. So God is in me and he's obscured, he's blocked off. But every now and then I'm enchanted by a starlit night, or I see a beautiful flower, or I see a child and their mother, and I can feel God. I needed and wanted God, but he was quickly blotted out by worldly clamors, most of those within myself, straight out of Bill's story. So this fundamental idea of God that's obscured by calamity, pomp, and worship of other things. It's the pomp. Pomp means self. My own self-concernedness actually blocks me off from God. And where do I learn this self-concernedness? In many respects, I learned the self-concernedness through the society that I grew up in. Okay? And the worship of other things. The worship of other things is also what I learned in this society that I've grown up in. The society that I've grown up in is based on a foundation of self. And when I really look at the things that are blocking me, I've actually had no real choice in deciding how my life really went anyway. I've just been indoctrinated into a society that has the foundation of self. I have pomp of self because our foundation of our society is built in it. And I worship what everybody else worships, which are things that I'm supposed to get that make me happy. And where do I see this in the big book? In the step 3 again, it talks about, is he not a victim of the delusion that he can wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world if he only manages well? Yeah, I'm a victim. And when you look up the word victim, it means somebody that's been tricked or duped. Well, who tricked and duped me? Well, society kind of tricked me. They told me, and I remember from my own life's experiences, because when I quit drinking at 22 years old on a prayer, I stood at the turning point and I was sitting there looking at life going, what's the point? What's the point of life anyway? And I had this exact same experience when I was 13 or 14 years old, before I found my solution of drugs and alcohol. So 2 points in my life within about 12 years of each other, I'm standing at the turning point going, what's the point of life? I'm restless, irritable, discontented inside. And now I don't have the drink and the drugs at 22 years old. Now I need something else, but I don't even know what's wrong with me. Like most people in our society don't know what's wrong with them. And then I looked around and I'm like, you know what? People with money have what they want. You know, people that are rich can do whatever they want. They can even buy themselves out of trouble. You know what? That's what I'm going to have. The billboards tell me to have that. You know, the commercials that I see with the boats and the chicks and the sports and all these things that involve money and status, that's what I'm going to have. So then I spent the next 15 years of my life seeking out status and money and toys. And I got it. My company was making about $3 million a year by the time, you know, I started smoking crack. But all through those years, like I can look back today and I'm like, my untreated alcoholism was treated with drugs and alcohol from the time I was 14 to 22. And it worked not bad. And then by the end, it was burning me down and destroying my life. So I had to give it up. And on a prayer, and I didn't even care about prayer or God, but I was so broken at 22 years old, I begged God and he helped me, and I never drank, but I didn't give him any credit. I just went on with my life. And then I started that business. So now I'm treating my untreated alcoholism with the world of the material, because I'm a victim of the delusion that if I wrest my satisfaction and happiness out of this world by having the right amount of money, by having the right woman, having the right truck, having the right house, having the right, whatever it was, that I'm going to be happy and satisfied. And if I move all these pieces of the puzzle my own way, will determine my own happiness. You know, it talks about it in the step 7 and the 12 and 12. Never did I think, you know, character building and spiritual values have to come first. Character building was always lost in the dust after my chase of what I thought was happiness, because I am that victim of a delusion, and the delusion is a lie. When you look up delusion, it means that it's a lie that I believe to be true. But I can look at the evidence and know that it's not true, but I still believe it to be true. And what are some of those delusions? Money will always make me happy. And I still have the little bit of that delusion, although it's only like 5% probably of the 100% that it was most of my life. And women and job and status. Those delusions are very, very thick. I don't have most of them today because of the work that I've done in this program. Primarily working with other alcoholics has allowed me to understand this literature at a level that, you know, most people will never get to. And I don't mean to say that arrogantly, but it's just the facts. Victim of a delusion that I can wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world if I only manage well. And resting, when you look at how Bill W. wrote rest, it's W-R-E-S-T. And when you look up that word, it means to pry, to grab, to snatch, to take, to manipulate, to wrestle out of life, selfishly, my own happiness and satisfaction. So the foundation of self right there, if I manage it well. Well, that actually is the root of my trouble. And that's really what I need to fucking learn, excuse my language, in this step 4. I need to find out the manifestations of self. So I'm going to just quickly kind of skim this page 64 here. Step 4 was we did a personal inventory. Step 4 was a business, which takes no regular inventory, usually goes broke. I'm the businessman. I came in here broke, bankrupt, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, and for me, financially as well. Taking a commercial inventory is a fact-finding, fact-facing process. I need to find the facts, and I need to face the facts with the help of somebody else who's done this work before. Because left to my own egoic, delusional brain, I can justify and rationalize the most errant nonsense to suit my actions in my life, in my past life, and today. I still need that person. It is an effort to discover the truth about stock and trade, not my truth, the truth. And I can't always see the truth because I got a brain that has a manifestation of self. Even though sometimes I want to be objective, I can't be because my ego and rationalization won't allow me to be fully objective. And other people can see truths that I can't. To discover the truth about stock and trade, one object is to disclose damaged or unsaleable goods and get rid of them promptly without regret. Well, that's what happens. I get to expose these damaged, unsaleable goods, these manifestations of self that are actually harming my life and harming other people, and get rid of them without regret. But I wouldn't say fully without regret, because a lot of these defects and defense mechanisms and tools and anger that I use to expand my life, I don't want to get rid of them without regret because I think they are still useful. So some of them are very hard to let go, which is why it says in step 6, if you are not willing, you pray until the willingness comes, because some of these things are very difficult to unload. So if I am to be successful, I cannot fool myself about the values. Okay. So we did exactly the same thing with our lives. We took stock honestly. First, we searched out the flaws in our makeup, which caused our failure. I love that line. So I'm searching out the flaws within my makeup, and think about this shirt. It has its makeup and all of the threads are intertwined, okay? I search out the flaws within my makeup, deep down inside. Back in the step 3, it talked about our problems we think arise out of ourselves. The problems that run my life arise from deep down within me, arise from out of myself. They come out. The behaviors and the defects and the actions that I actually work with in this society that we deem are defects of character, they're only the responses to the subconscious that actually has its own autonomy that runs my life. And these problems actually come from the deep subconscious that I can't even really see. And that's why I talked earlier about the step 4 for somebody new is quite different than an ongoing step 4 for somebody who really wants to grow and learn in this program, because we have to get to the root, but we're not getting to the root on the first set of steps. We're just skimming the surface so we can start the journey of healing. So I have to look at the flaws within my makeup, which comes over time. Over time. And I'll say this, in your first 2 years of recovery, it's really important to understand it's a lot of doing a lot of different things. Okay. You get into that second, third year of recovery, it has to change. You have to start getting deeper, and you have to start understanding your feelings and using your meditation and using your prayer. Working with others is a great tool to allow this to happen organically. If you don't work with others, which most people won't because they're too selfish to actually give it back away, then you're really in some trouble. Because what will happen is we'll live our life with the best of intention, because nobody really understands the importance of step 10. So we live our life with the best of intention, self-willing the principles into our life, but still running our life with the best of intention. But underneath those motives is self. So we're still stepping on the toes of our fellows, causing ourselves pain and other people pain. So as I start working a real program here, and I keep a clean house through the 10, 11, and 12, I can deal with the shit as it comes up, because it's coming up. I got 40 years of pain and guilt and shame that's going to come up. And that first set of steps in the first 2 years just skim the surface off. It's coming up in the 3rd and 4th, 5th year, 6th year. So I need to keep a clean house through the dictates of the 10, 11, and 12 so that I'm able to deal with the shit when it comes up. Why? Because the shit will deal with me if I don't. And we've all seen it. We've all seen it. People with 3 years, 2 years, 5 years, 7 years drink or kill themselves. Why? Because they didn't keep a clean house and the shit dealt with them. And they don't know what's wrong because they just kept doing the same thing that they did in their first year, or they stopped doing anything. So we searched out the flaws in our makeup, which caused our failure. Being convinced that self manifests itself in various ways is what had defeated us. We considered its common manifestations. So way back in the step 3, it talks about being convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. I really stopped there with the people that I work with, and I'm like, are you convinced? And most people don't even know what convinced means, right? It's really important to understand the actual literature and what the words mean, which is why I've spent a lot of time kind of describing what the words mean, because the person, you or me, I get a deeper understanding of what the depth of we're talking about is, which is really important for us. Convinced means without a doubt. So am I convinced that any life run by me is not successful? Back in step 3. And then as you go through that step 3, he uses the word convinced a couple more times. And then when he gets here to this part in step 4, it's really important the placement of where he uses this. Being convinced that self. Are you convinced that self's the problem? Hopefully. Has manifested itself in various ways is what defeated me. I don't, like, I always blame the world. The world screws me. You screw me. No, I screw me. I screw me every time. It's a spiritual axiom that every time I'm disturbed, the problem is within me. But I spent my whole life thinking the problem was outside, within you. And when we first start working that step 10, like the actual process of step 10, you're going to be triggered to work that process because of external situations around you in your life. But the key part of that step is as you keep working it persistently and consistently with the commitment to change and seek humility is something to be desired in itself, rather than something you must have. You work that step, eventually you will see that it's not the people outside you, it's always inside you. The fight is never outside of you, it's always inside of you. When you get placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected, it's not from alcohol. The problem's been removed, it's not the alcohol. You've been removed. You've worked the steps so well, which is really step 3 and step 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You've worked that step so well that you've placed your own brain, your own self, your own consciousness in a position of neutrality. And you're okay. You've built compassion for other people because that's another thing that step does. You've built love for other people because that's another thing that step does. And you're okay with you. So then you can put yourself in the world of other people and you're placed in a position of neutrality. Why? Because you practice that step so much that you're able to live what tradition 10 starts talking about. AA has no opinion on outside issues. Hence, the AA name ought not be drawn into public controversy. It's Bill Ward has no opinion on outside issues because of his work in the step 10. Hence, because of that, Bill Ward is not drawn into other people's drama because of their trauma. And I can understand you're emotionally ill, spiritually sick, and frequently wrong, just like me. You have the same manifestations of self, but maybe different ones. And I understand that you're just trying to do your best too. And I don't have the judgment because I'm not fighting anything or anyone anymore, especially myself. And this is kind of what I'm talking about is a huge component of the step 4, because that step 10 has all this in it. So the other thing I want to talk about on this line here is, so we considered its common manifestations. So if self is the problem, and this book tells me I'm considering its common manifestations, what about the uncommon ones? Okay, the common ones are good for my first set of steps, but if I want long-term recovery for years, I better remember what this says. This is just common shit. What about the uncommon stuff? Because it's the uncommon stuff that's deeper that actually runs the common stuff. So I need to work this program at a deeper level as time goes on. And I'm really saying, especially after that first or second year, it has to get deeper. And really in the step 5, and you look in the first paragraph of the big book, it says we ascertained in a rough way what the trouble is. So if I'm in step 4 here and it says common manifestations of self, what about the uncommon ones? And I look at the first paragraph of step 5 and it says ascertaining in a rough way what the trouble is. What about the deeper than rough way? I need to get deeper as time goes on. And that's really important, really super important. And here's the thing. Yeah, the newcomer is the most important person in the room. You hear that all the time. Okay. I don't agree. Yeah, they're important. Everybody's life is important. But what about the person who has 1 year sober that doesn't understand what the problem is, what the true predicament is, that doesn't understand self? I need that guy beside me so we can help more people. These are the guys that are most important people in the room to me, are the person that has done a set of steps or done their first year and they don't really get it. Now let's really show them. Let's like grab them, let's hold them, and let's take them through this literature again, and let's show them really what the root of the trouble is, which is self, so that they're here and they can help. Because not enough people stay because we're just focused on the liquor. I'm focused on the design for a living and the defective character, and that is how I sponsor. And through my success rate and my sponsorship, 6 or 7 are staying sober out of 10. Well, the big book says 50% got sober at once, 25% with some relapses, and the other 25% had a better quality of life. So I'm kind of batting what the big book says. Why? Because I'm in the literature showing them the exact directions without giving them too much coddling. Because I think it's also really important to show these guys the flaws in their makeup that are causing their failure. And in some sense, that's caring more about their life than their feelings, and telling them the truth. One thing I've learned through sponsorship and being a pillar in the community is people want to hear the truth. Even though they might not like it, their heart loves to hear it, but their pride doesn't. But it's the difference between failure and success. Okay, so as we kind of move through the columns and the resentments, we have 4 columns essentially, right? You could bust it up into 5, but typically most of us do it in 4. You have who it is, what they did to you, their symptoms of their own spiritual sickness, what they did, what affects and then my part. But it's really not my part, because if your part is 30% of the resentment, your part now becomes 100% of what we're looking at. So it's not really your part. And the book doesn't actually say your part. So I really like to stick to what the book says. It says we resolutely look for our own mistakes, putting out of our minds entirely the wrongs others had done. And the best way to do this is go through the first 4 or 5 with the person, taking that 10% or 30% of their part and making that 100% their part. And then as you do the first 4 or 5 with that person, they get a better understanding, and then they can kind of kick ass on it for the rest of the that portion of their step work. But here's the thing. In the program and in the rooms, everybody focuses on the 4th column. You go to a meeting, everyone talks about the 4th column. Okay, that's great. That's great for your first or second set of steps. Really, the first set of steps, if I want to get down to the root of the problem, I really need to start understanding that 3rd column. And when you're looking at the 3rd column, that's actually where the problems we think arise out of ourselves. That 3rd column is where the roots of this are, where the autonomy of your subconscious that governs your life and runs your defects that you see is. And when I start understanding how important that 3rd column is, then you'll get to the root of the trouble and your recovery will take another level. And really why I can't leave the 12 and 12 alone on this talk today is because in the 12 and 12, on the first page and a half of the 12 and 12, it talks about the 3rd column. It talks about the instincts so necessary for our existence, and they're God-given. But when we use them out of whack, they drive us powerfully, blindly, many times subtly. These things drive us, dominate us, insist upon rule in our lives. And what is it? It talks about the instincts for sex relation, emotional, material security, and companionship. And I've found we'll often find anger in that 4th column and like the manifestations of anger. And later in the sex conduct, we'll see how the sex conduct really affects us. And we always say anger and lust, right? But for both of these big headline topics, anger is always the secondary emotion. Underneath anger, I've I've tied it almost always to emotional security based in the instincts. And by looking at the layers, which only come through time, you can find out where the roots of some of the anger actually comes from. And you can get into the emotional disturbance of why the anger comes out in these various ways. And really where anger hides well is within the depressive and the victim, morbid martyr type of alcoholic. Anger hides in the weeds with that type because it's not outward. Those are really hard people to work with because they won't admit it, because their pride, like it talks about in the 12 and 12. We had to find a chink in the armor of the walls that the ego had built so that the light of reason can shine. We have to find a chink in the walls of this armor that our ego builds to protect us so that that light of reason can shine, because behind that wall, it's dark. But as you chip through that wall of the ego and whatever the defect might be, that little piece of concrete that finally you bust through, now that little light shines a lot of light into the dark, and you can keep chipping that hole and bring light. So just in that step 4, resentment's really important. Third column, as you're moving in your recovery, it's super, super, super important. Okay. So now I'm going to touch on fears. Fears are basically at the root of all of this, right? It's the evil and corroding thread. The fabric of our existence, again, was, shot through with it. Fear, it set in motion trains of circumstances that brought us misfortune we felt we didn't deserve. But did we not ourselves set the ball rolling? Fear, it ought to be classed with stealing. It seems to cause more trouble. And when you really articulate and extrapolate what Bill is saying in those trains of circumstances, think about decisions you made in fear years ago and how the trains connect and the circumstances connect, and then it brings you misfortune in your life that you feel you didn't deserve. But did you not yourself set the ball rolling? And it seems to steal more than anything, fear. And it will steal your life. It'll steal your recovery. It'll steal your relationships. Fear is not the number one offender with sobriety time in. If resentments are still the number one offender and you're 5 years in, look at your program. Fear becomes the number one offender if you're working a good program. And then fear really needs to be honed in on. And the process of the fears in the big book is pretty decent. It's a really good way to get down into the root. And I have some other methods that I like to use in addition to what's in the book. But the book has some really good aspects, looking at your fear, reviewing it, asking why you have it. Where's God reliance helped you? Where's self-reliance failed you? To somebody new, that's a little bit difficult. But what's not difficult is at least asking God to remove the fear and direct our attention, not what he would have me do, what would he have me be in any given situation? And trying to learn that takes some time too. Like everything takes time, right? And I think the most important thing of when it takes time, if you follow the directions within the literature, everything just comes to fruition. But if you're not following the directions and you're following it on a theoretical basis, you start ingraining bad patterns of recovery into your recovery, and you actually detriment your recovery in the long run and cause yourself a lot of pain, which is why I'm so adamant about following the exact clear-cut directions that are laid out in the book. I'm going to quickly go to sex conduct. I call it relationship conduct. In the big book, it does talk about sex, troublesome, very troublesome. We don't want to be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct. I think for me as a sponsor, this is where most of everything is revealed. The biggest issues within the human being are revealed through this exact perfect process of the sex conduct in the big book. We reviewed our conduct over the years past. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate? Whom did we hurt? I always put whom did we hurt in the first column, and then I go into the second column with where had we been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate. And I get the person to write out the word selfish or dishonest or inconsiderate, and then write me a quick little bullet point off each one. And why it's so important to have pen to paper and not do the stuff on a computer is because there's something about the subconscious in a pen. When you write things over and over and over, it hits your subconscious at a spiritual awakening level that allows you to change and see the truth. And then the third column for me would be, just did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? And again, I get the person to write down the word and then what it was and who it was. Quick bullet points. And this work takes work, right? And the other thing that I'll say about whom did we hurt? Oftentimes, we're only thinking about the individual that we've hurt directly. But what about the woman who I screwed with for 5 years, who every time I broke up with her and then got back with her, she had to go and deal with her emotions with her mom, who her mom cared for her. And her mom and her dad had to take her in every time. And she had kids who suffered and her sister who suffered. I need to put those names on this list because I hurt them too. And they will also get a tick on where I was selfish, dishonest, and inconsiderate. And the reason why it's so important to really extrapolate on the people that we hurt and what it's talking about in this portion of the step 4 is because I need to be sorry. I need to look at my harms in a humiliating way, in a humbling through pain way. Because if I'm not humbled properly in the 4 and the 5, to me, the most important step is step 6. I will not take step 6 and I will not change. I need to be humbled through pain because I need step 6 to mean something. Because if step 6 means something, then step 8 and 9 will mean something. If step 6 doesn't mean anything, step 8 and 9 will be a check mark to get through the steps and get my side of the street clean. And you know what? The shelf life of that type of recovery might be 18 months. So I got 2 more minutes. In this sex conduct, where were we at fault? Really important. Bring the faults, list them, because those harms are actually what are going to generate a lot of the humility that you need. And what should we have done instead? And really, the patterns will all be there. I should have quit giving her false hope and I should have stayed away. Quit giving her false hope, should have stayed away. I should have been honest, I should have stayed away. Like whatever it is, but the patterns will reveal themselves. And you will see a lot of the deep psychological patterns of why you want to mind and emotionally manipulate people to give you the love and affection and whatever validation is that you need. So I'm going to tie it in with step 7 as we work this program for a while. And a while. Tradition 7 talks about we are self-supporting through our own contributions. When you take that tradition and you bring it over to the step, just like I did with tradition 10, Bill Ward is self-supporting through his own contributions based in his relationship with God. In tradition 4, it's each group is autonomous, except in matters affecting other groups or AA as a whole. Bill Ward is autonomous, and I don't have the right to affect other people or the world as a whole. But my autonomy cannot be governed in self. My autonomy is governed in my relationship with God. Through my autonomy built in a relationship with God, I will heal through these steps. And I will be able to be self-supporting through my own contributions with self and God, declining outside contributions of women, money, power, validation, whatever it is. And when sex is troublesome, you jump into the harder into helping others. Why? Because it cures the imperious urge. And the minute you have early relationships in recovery, and later ones too, they screw us up. You deplete willingness and willpower within the physiology of your body, and you lose the focus on the target. But when you can abstain from releasing that physical sex energy in a physical form, you actually give yourself vitality and you give yourself focus, but it's very hard. But that's why Bill wrote it. I've studied some other literature that backs me up. I could probably talk about 20, 30 minutes on this exactly, but I know my time's done. So I really appreciate you guys listening to me today. I hope you got a little bit of something. If you ever want to talk or get in touch with me, Summer can hook you up. I'm always around. And thank you for the time, and I love you.